Welcome to today's TAFE Talks. I'm Teresa Schmidt, the Director of Policy and Governance at TAFE Directors Australia. And today's topic is tertiary harmonisation and the importance of shared data standards. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of all the different lands upon which we meet today. I'm coming to you today from Gubbi Gubbi country, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us in the discussion today. If you would like to introduce yourself and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that you are on, please feel free to do so in the chat. So I'll say Wanya, welcome to you all. The Australian Government is taking action to break down barriers between TAFE and higher education to create a more aligned or harmonised tertiary education system. In today's session, we will explore how tertiary harmonisation can be supported through shared data standards. So let me begin by introducing Technology One, who is one of TDA's valued corporate affiliates. Technology One's collaboration with TAFE Directors Australia reflects a shared commitment to helping the vocational education and training community to respond to sector-wide challenges and to create more connected, intuitive experiences for students. At the core of this partnership is a continued focus on innovation, adaptability, and meaningful support for TAFE providers. As a long-standing partner to the sector, Technology One works with more than 60% of TAFE and BED institutions across Australia and New Zealand and supports over 6.5 million higher education students globally. Technology One helps providers to simplify their complex operations and to reduce administrative burden, enabling staff to focus on delivering quality education. So really a great presentation today when we're talking about data, simplifying and streamlining that data so that we can focus on what we really need to do well, which is quality education. And so we're really happy to have joining us from Technology One today, Olivia Roberts. Olivia is the General Manager of Student Solutions at Technology One. Olivia, or Liv, has recently joined them as their General Manager for Student Management Solutions. She spent 15 years leading student and registry services in UK institutions, prior to which she held senior delivery and project roles in large IT organisations. Someone's just said that they can't see me. So have you lost me? Oh, Melinda, you might need to bring my screen back. Sorry, I just got a message to say you can't see me. That's all right. You all know what I look like, so we can work with that. Liv is passionate about promoting proper data management in our institutions and how technology can enable business success to deliver an exceptional student experience. We're really happy to have Liv here today, an active member of the tertiary education sector in Australia and in the UK, and probably quite well known to some of you on the screen on the call today. And also now joining us is, so you'll hear from Olivia soon, but also joining us today is Dr. Fan Xiang. Now, you've probably heard Fan speak before because she is the Acting Assistant Secretary of the National Skills System branch at Jobs and Skills Australia, or JSA. Fan leads a broad program of work that delivers trusted insights and advice to connect policy, practice and data across Australia's tertiary education and training system. Her work helps shape a cohesive, inclusive and future-ready national skills system with a strong emphasis on building a more joined-up tertiary education system. Fan has extensive experience across government, academic and international organisations in the areas of policy, research, economics and data analytics. She is a technical expert with a strong passion for collaboration, applying contemporary techniques and technologies to inform evidence-based policy, reforms and system design. We're really happy to have Fan here today and looking forward to the conversation. Joining Fan and Olivia today is Charlsey Pearce. Charlsey is the CEO of MortarCAPS. the founding CEO of MortarCAPS, which is a not-for-profit organisation behind the MortarCAPS Higher Learning Data Standard, MCDS. Now, if you don't know much about that, you're going to be quite proficient by the end of this presentation today. With a background in digital transformation, education, technology and growth strategy, Charlsey has led the development of MCDS from a sector-led idea to a globally recognised framework. She now works with governments, institutions and vendors across Australia, Canada and the UK to drive greater interoperability and innovation across the post-secondary education landscape. So we have some wonderful speakers today. And before I hand over to Fan, who's going to kick us off, I wanted to let you know that today's session is being recorded and the recording will be made available to everyone who's registered for this TAFETalks session and on the TDA website. Closed captioning is also available for this event. If you have questions that you'd like to pose to our speakers, and I'm sure you will, please use the Q&A box throughout the session and we will come back to those at the end. You can use the chat for discussion, but we won't be able to monitor the chat necessarily for questions. So please make sure you use that Q&A function so your question doesn't get missed. It now gives me great pleasure to hand over to Fan from Jobs and Skills Australia to kick off today's discussion. Thank you, Fan.
Thank you, Teresa, and good afternoon, everyone. As Teresa just introduced, my name is Fan Xiang, and I'm from Jobs and Skills Australia, or JSA. So first of all, thank you to TAFE Directors Australia for inviting me to today's TAFE Talks. And today, I will set the scene for our discussion on tertiary harmonisation, what it means, why it matters, and how data are essential to making it work for everyone, learners, providers, and employers. Next slide, please. So what is tertiary harmonisation? Tertiary harmonisation is the strategic alignment of the higher education and vocational education and training, or VET, sectors. And we're not talking about merging them, but about making sure that they work together, coordinating and cooperating. So learners or students can build the right mix of knowledge, skills, and practical experience for a dynamic labour market. And who's involved? Of course, it will be a team effort. Students, VET and higher ed providers, business, employers, unions, also the governments. But as you can see here, students are at the center, as the goal here is to remove unnecessary barriers and make it easier for students to move between them. And how do we make it work? It comes down to the system's architecture, frameworks such as AQF, new tools such as National Skills Taxonomy, which we'll touch on later, and a national credit transfer system. Regulatory requirements and funding arrangements are also crucial parts of this picture. So, why does this matter? As you know, tertiary education is central to tackling Australia's big challenges. For example, analysis from us, JSA, shows that over the next 10 years, more than 9 in 10 new jobs are expected to require post-secondary qualifications. And harmonisation means we can supply more and better industry-ready graduates and support people's lifelong learning. When we have a harmonised education system, it will benefit everyone. Like learners can build skills and move easily across the systems, and the education providers can expand access and collaborate better. Also, governments can strengthen their funding and the outcomes, and employers will get graduates who are ready for real-world jobs. And let's move on to next. In order to make all of this practical, earlier this year, Jobs in Australia, we have actually put a lot of work and groundwork in this and published a major report on tertiary harmonisation in February this year. This report sets out 19 recommendations grouped into 3 key areas, from the foundations to early priorities and to medium-term reforms. The big idea here is to move away from ad hoc fixes towards a joined up infrastructure, policy, funding, data, and other system enablers, so we can build pathways for students that are predictable, portable, and fair. And now I want to talk about a couple of specific initiatives that JSA is leading in this space in supporting tertiary harmonisation. And firstly, the development of the National Skills Taxonomy. And next slide, please. So National Skills Taxonomy is a shared language for skills. It helps us move beyond job titles and qualifications to move on what people can actually do. Whether those skills were learned on the job, in life, or through formal education or qualifications. So for this project at the moment, we are still in early stage of its development, but there are a few things I want to mention here. Firstly, this National Skills Taxonomy is built to work for everyone and will benefit everyone, just like the tertiary harmonisation, the big topic, because it will connect the different skills frameworks so individuals, education providers, also employers can speak the same language and use the same language. Secondly, it recognizes the diversity and breadth of skills that people can bring, not just technical abilities, but also those invisible skills like communication, problem solving, and empathy that are essential in every workplace now and into the future. In addition, we're building this National Skills Taxonomy through extensive consultation with industry, with education providers, sectors, unions, also the different levels of governments. So it reflects the real world need, not just what's written in the curriculum. And now let's move on to the next. So on this slide, we can see what the National Skills Taxonomy really means in practice. Imagine you are looking at a role like a senior account manager. Instead of just listing the job titles or qualifications, the skills taxonomy breaks it down into actual skills this person will bring to the table from the previous role's current role, also the skills that you would like to develop through other roles or further education and training. So the National Skills Taxonomy makes all of these skills visible and valued, regardless of where and how they were learned. And this skills-based view is what really makes the National Skills Taxonomy so powerful, because it supports a smoother transitions between roles, between sectors, also between education levels. And it will help everyone speak the same language about skills. And now let's talk about the data side of things. We can go to the next slide. Because, as you will know, a harmonized tertiary system needs the right infrastructure behind the scenes, behind all the discussions. One of the big data projects that JSA is working on at the moment is building an integrated data asset for our tertiary system. Based on some of you might have heard ABS Person Level Integrated Data Asset, or PLIDA. In simple terms, PLIDA brings together information from right across governments, things like health, education, employment, and much, much more, all in a secure and privacy protected way. This graph here shows the key data sets currently in PLIDA, and those education-related data sets are at the left bottom corner. So why is this important for us? For learners, this means we'll have a much clearer picture of what works, who is benefiting from different pathways, and where the sticking points are. Also, for providers and policymakers, it means we can design programs and policies that are genuinely evidence-based and measure their impact with much more confidence, because those data are real data from people. And the real power here is getting this whole of life view. So we can track students' journey in the education, even before they enter the education system, and years after their graduation, not just the year or at graduation. And we can go to next one. So let's bring this back to something that is really practical, what we've already built on the VET side. This vocational education and training or VET national data asset, we call it VANDA, is a great example of how we are starting to put these ideas into action. 2 years ago, we published the first VANDA report, which covered 100 qualifications just at the national level. But we were not stopping there. The next release from VANDA will coming out in December this year. We'll have about 500 VET qualifications and include a much richer set of student characteristics, things like cultural background, socioeconomic status, and a lot more. We've also built a public dashboard so anyone can explore the data for themselves. And this dashboard is really, really useful for students, for their families, for career advisors, or anyone who is passionate about our skills and training system. And next, please. And before I wrap up and hand over to Charlsey, and I wanted to quickly show you what the data is actually telling us. The data from VANDA gives us some really clear message about the value of our VET system. As you can see here on this slide, completing a VET qualification delivers a real boost for the students. Better income, better employment, and less reliance on the income support system. It also opened pathways for further study, like other VET study and higher education. So that's all from me for now. Just before I hand over to Charlsey, I just want to quickly summarize and bring all of these together. Policy and governance gives us the authorized environment, a roadmap, and a common language. The national skills taxonomy will make skills visible across different systems and sectors. Then data infrastructure lets us measure outcomes and manage pathways. Also, shared data standards and platforms will help us operationalize this harmonization or harmonize the system. With that context in place, I now hand over to Charlsey and Olivia for the rest of the webinar, and I'll join back later for questions and discussions. Over to you, Charlsey.
Thank you, Fan. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen now. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to speak to you. I am very, very excited to share the work that we have done to date because it is a fantastic example of collaboration across the sector, but also the sector across the world, and also industry and experts and government. So to say that this has happened quickly because it's been crowdsourced, I think is an understatement. MortarCAPS is a child of the sector. We are designed, built, and owned by the sector under the auspices initially of CAUDIT, but we now have formal relationships with most of the peak member bodies, including obviously TDA. This is a fantastic story for Australia. This is Australian innovation at work. We have created an independent charity, which is a data standard anchored in the foundational vision to bring to life what Fan has just expressed to you. We are free to the sector because of the IP being owned by those who are building it. And we are funded by the software vendors. And we're very grateful to Technology One as our founding SIS vendor, student management vendor, to ensure that they are building the future in co-creation with us. And that's very, very powerful. We now have over 100 institutions engaged across Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, from which I am from. And this continues to grow and evolve and expand every single day. I have to thank every one of these institutions, especially the 6 dual sector institutions and TAFE New South Wales, who have put the hundreds of hours into developing the standard to bring this to life. We have spent hours and hours and hours together every week in design working groups and sub-working groups focused on trying to ensure that we're getting the right eyes across what we need to do to bring forward the roadmap that JSA and other government departments would like us to do. We've ensured that we are mapping all of the tertiary reporting requirements to ensure that the PLID data that Fan is speaking of can come to life more readily, and to also work closely with our vendor partners to develop transitional architecture so that no one is forced into a situation where it's going to cost them millions of dollars and decades to get a new system in place. We're looking at practical, pragmatic, and agile ways to meet the future. Our objectives are clear. Obviously, we know we need a new connected data ecosystem, definitely in the face of AI. We know that the ecosystem has to be incredibly secure and rigorous. And so our North Star for this is the financial services industry and how open banking has been working across multiple countries. We also are working to ensure that we're bringing industry to the table. We are trying to build the bridge between the sector and industry. And a core part of that is ensuring that we can create a data standard that allows for the reference data, like the taxonomy for skills and capabilities, to be embedded in things like rubrics, learning outcomes, and other things, to ensure that there's practical application for Salesforce with their certifications as much as there is for any formal education provider. Tertiary harmonization is at the core. What we have produced is a standard that is fit for size, for big and small, for private and public, for tertiary, for post-secondary or university, and doing research as much as a TAFE in Australia or a college and polytechnic in Canada. And we're really focused also on ensuring that the key pieces of data that we need to be able to support students properly is embedded in this throughout. So why do we have to do this? There was an interesting comment from a CEO in the US who I will not name that said, in the face of AI, one of the great benefits of this is that you don't have to pay the human tax. Well, the human tax is actually employees. It's actually people. So can we really call this productivity if we leave anyone behind? And so we know that it's absolutely critical to keep the human at the center of our ideation. We know that the systems that we're currently on are legacy systems, and we know that we are actually unique as a sector in that we don't have standardization across the data models that we leverage from our vendor community, and that we don't have the plug and play environment that healthcare, manufacturing, logistics, financial services have. So we are now stepping forward and working with our vendor partners to ensure that we do have that, and that will lower the cost of both our technology and the very complicated system that we're in. I won't labor the point on skills-based education. TAFE does this best, but it's been an insight and a paradigm shift for our higher education colleagues to suddenly realize that it's critical to see the skills and capabilities within the learning outcomes in everything that we do, because that is what industry demands, and that is what the future will require. This is my version of what you'll see later when Olivia takes you through. But we know this is a complicated environment. Even this morning, I was on the call with a Canadian college in Vancouver, and they were bemoaning the 300 systems they have to manage their student experience and the poor interconnectivity between those. How do you track a student who's an inquiry for, another program, but is just starting, is still studying here and may also be a TA or even a researcher in the university ecosystem? How do we get to a view where we can see the individual across everything internally? And that's before we even look at trying to pass data between each other. What we are in the middle of is a race to the base, if we're honest. We need to harden our infrastructure in the face of what we know is coming. We need to keep the human at the center, and we need to create an ecosystem that is fit for purpose and agile enough to meet the unknown incoming. And we really are in a position where we don't know what we don't know, but we know we have to fix the base. We have spent a huge amount of time ideating with experts and vendors who are working across multiple geographies. So we're getting insights from the UK, from the US, from Canada, from the European Union into what is actually needed to reform the tertiary sectors globally and to meet the learner where they're at. And so using the ideation from the crowdsourced brain trust that we have, we've come up with 3 core pieces that we are now in the process of either building or getting funding to move forward with. The first part was, of course, to bring the data together and to create a standard that aligned us as a sector. And so that is where MCDS or MortarCAPS has commenced. That was the first piece of work. And we have now built the entire life cycle. We've moved into financials, asset management, HR, credit for prior learning, or RPL, and also research administration. So we've got the full kit bag now that we're bringing to life. The next part is if you have this data and you need to move this around, the risk is so high. We know it's happening more often, the hacking, it's going to get worse. So we have to use what is available to us as the true North Star, the most secure infrastructure, and that is open banking. So we have won the RFP under HES and MyEquals to create the data service or capability cloud, which is what we're calling it, for ANZ. It's under the ANZ credit management system, and that piece of work we are hoping to commence in the early new year. So what will that mean? Very, very technical, so I won't go into the details here, but for anyone who'd like to, we have lots of things to show you later. But what it means is that we are creating a learner-controlled, consent-based ecosystem which is as secure as we can possibly make it. Open banking works on something called a public key infrastructure. So I'll give you a ready-made example of this. Under the Commonwealth Practical Placements Program, students were asked to provide details related to effectively their ATO, their lower socioeconomic background, and also an almost I had children in the childcare recently, so this is fresh for me. Centrelink's means testing. So how many hours did I work and where am I getting government benefits? That data has to be handed over to an institution. We don't want that data. That is very sensitive personal data. And we also don't want the responsibility of having to keep that data up to date, or that student have to continue to keep that data up to date if they go over that threshold at any point. In the future, what we're looking at is the ability for an institution's ecosystem to call down a token from the ATO that says, does this student fit this profile? The ATO says, yes, brilliant. I don't need that data. The ATO keeps that data. We know that the ATO is a trusted and verified source of that information, and we can move on without actually having to access that data. Similarly, we will be able to create an ecosystem where a student can come into the ANZ Credit Mobility Portal and request for all of the data related to them to be pulled up into that. And that can be done seamlessly. And then they can choose to push that over to the other institution if they wish to apply. And so that becomes a very powerful ecosystem when you look at people dipping in and out. And so admissions is going to have to get much faster when we're looking at a portable, stackable, ongoing lifelong learning environment. And then finally, government reporting becomes a consumer of this data in real time. So that it's not the burden of creating these reports all the time that we have to then service. The government can simply absorb what they need when they need to in an anonymized way, and we can all move into an ecosystem which is much more rigid. The final thing, and we have a fantastic workshop tomorrow with a large number of people across the sector, industry, government, and others, including Canada, who will be sitting on the sidelines, kind of checking out what we're up to. And we're ideating for the future. We all know if you've ever hired someone, you're not as interested in their credential or their badge or their degree. It doesn't tell you anything about what their skills are. It doesn't tell you anything about what the individual is capable of. And it certainly doesn't allow us to provide things like continuity of care. So what we're looking at is a holistic capability record, which is anchored in consumer data rights. And we are working with the Consumer Data Rights Commissioner and Treasury to make sure that we are ensuring the consents are rigid. So I'll give you another example. I'm currently studying at TAFE New South Wales. I'm now going to go to Macquarie Uni. I'm also seeing a mental health professional on campus, and I have a learning disorder, and so I need a bit more time with my exams. I want to choose to share that information to continue my continuity of care between TAFE and Macquarie. I also have a whole bunch of work experience that's related to my degree at Macquarie that I'm going into that I'd like them to look at whether or not they could provide recognition for prior learning for. I will package that all up in my HCR and be able to hand that over to any institution or any employer or whoever I choose, because as under consumer data rights, I can choose how much, who, and for how long. And that's the real power of ensuring that we're leveraging some of these fantastic initiatives that have occurred in other industries. And the great thing is that the Australian public is quite savvy with this around now. They understand primarily their privacy and consent. They understand that they have a choice in this matter, and we want to ensure that we give that to them. I'll give you another example. I'm at Melbourne University. I'm seeing a counselor. I've broken up with my boyfriend. I've been seeing this counselor for 3 months. I'm now moving to Sydney. I'm going to go to Sydney University. I actually don't want to take this with me. I'm going to leave that baggage there. I'm not going to share that health data around that, and I'm just going to start fresh. And that is my decision. And so I hope you can see that what we're looking at is so much more than just a badge and a credential and moving your recognition for prior learning around. We're trying to anchor a paradigm shift around a learner and enable the future in the face of AI. So what have we built so far? All of our technical sub-working groups are established and are up and running. We have over 100 institutions and around 500 people who are collaborating around this all the time, every week, to bring this to life. We also have institutions who are building actively into the standard, and there's lots of support depending on what it is they're trying to do, whether it's just integrating 2 new tools or looking at a middle layer, or you're trying to build a new API, or you're buying a new curriculum system called CourseLoop. All of that stuff we can absolutely help you with. It's all free. It's all been established. We are also working to ensure that the documentation is shareable so that you can pick it up and you can do this work because someone else has done the heavy lifting, both financially and the time. And that we're hoping will accelerate adoption for everyone. We are just about to release V1.2, which includes recognition and learning and teaching, but we've done the chunky parts so far. We are now also ideating recognition for prior learning and the holistic capability record, research administration, financials, and HR. And we're hoping to be able to take the reference data around skills and taxonomies in the future and be able to embed that in. But the containers are ready and they're ready to roll. So if you are interested in getting involved in this community, there is a form you can fill out. You can download everything. It is free. It is free for you to join and use. And please do get part of this community. We need you. We need your experience, and we need your insights into what works, what doesn't work, and how best to go about it. So thank you so much for your time. And Olivia will now be able to explain to you how it all comes to life once it's working.
Thank you, Charlsey. Okay, so my turn to share. Just give me a moment. I'm on the wrong page. Apologies. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you about this topic. As Teresa said earlier, I'm really passionate about it. I've been working in the sector for nearly 16 years now, inside universities in the UK, and I've been in Australia for about a year and a half. It's incredible to me and fortuitous the similarities we have across the two different regions, given that we're so far apart in terms of the mileage between ourselves and the UK. But it's been a topic of conversation about how we can look to harmonise some of the challenges we have around managing the data within institutions for a very, very long time. And so I'm really excited to be part of this initiative, because I think for once we have an opportunity to really change the dial, to focus on the student experience, but to also help us within our institutions to be able to deliver our services to students more efficiently. So what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about, we know that classic phrase, technology is the enabler of the business change, but actually to be able to do that, we need to understand what the business process is from an institutional perspective and how that looks to a student. So what I'm going to talk about is that exactly that. What is that student journey and that student life cycle? And there's a few different varieties of this. We have the classic piece, I think Charlsey alluded to it earlier, where you start that engagement around the inquiry piece. You then move that inquiry into an application. Once successful, that applicant becomes a student and they get enrolled onto their class of study, and then they progress through their academic cycle. And while I like this round vision of it, my preference is my student journey map. And I have been trucking this around with me for quite some time now. And why I like this is because it starts to look at the journey from a student perspective. As you'll see, starting over there in the classic piece that I just said around being an inquiry and an application, and then that whole record starting from that journey where you're starting to engage with an institution, multiple institutions often, and how you progress through that life cycle. This is probably the prettier version of the picture, because we all know within our institutions it's a lot more complex than this. And while the student is having a fairly linear experience, the different departments, the different people, the different services that are available within an institution mean that the student quite often goes off on a different little tube stop than the one we kind of typically see. So this is quite complex, and I think we all understand that. Well, we certainly understand that the student sees it as complex, and we need to make that much more seamless from their perspective. But I think if you then step inside the institution, what's going on in terms of how you're delivering those services. And some of what I'm calling out here is the back office or the registry, the typical registry type services. And again, this is the pretty view of it, because we don't necessarily think about it in terms of that holistic journey from start to finish. A lot of times, certainly with my experience, is we typically see it as the QA function or the admissions function or the student records function. And we don't necessarily understand how all of these functions hang together in that linear perspective. And again, these dots on here are fairly simplified, because we'll take student communications, for example. That doesn't typically sit within one team within an institution. It'll sit across the whole institution, and often there'll be different levels of it between the central services and the school services, and perhaps the counselling services. So there's a lot of complexity even in one particular element of that interaction that we have with the student. I like to then make this real. So the next slide talks a little bit about my experience of managing some of those data elements. And so apologies standing over pound signs on here. This is my experience from the UK. You'll see I've got little strawberries, and what I want to do here is kind of demonstrate how within an institution, we are dealing with students and we're dealing with a lot of data, and there's a lot of complexity in it, but actually we need that data to help us understand what we need to deliver to students. In the UK, it's very traditional to have strawberries after a graduation ceremony. And honestly, you wouldn't believe the amount of committee meetings I've been at and how many times we've discussed strawberries. But how do we know how many strawberries we need? Well, that's very much related back to how many students do we have? How have they progressed? What is their status? Are they actually, have they been invited to graduate? Are they going to attend? Are they going to bring guests with them? So a lot of complexity built into just one simple thing that we do from an institutional perspective, but very much reliant on the data that we store in our systems. I think if you add up all these numbers, I came up with a crazy amount of data, something like 7.5 million different data elements across an annual life cycle. And that's for an institution that I was working in that had 45,000 students. So the scale of what we're dealing with and the complexity of what we're dealing with is really quite phenomenal. And that's just within the student system. If we step outside of the student system, and Charlsey alluded to this as well, you know, I was in an institution and we had 110 satellite systems sitting off the main student system. And we perceived that we contained a lot of that data in the core student system, but actually the data was leaving that environment and it was eking out into the wider ecosystem. And then after, we weren't necessarily sure where it was going. So again, just that highlighting that complexity of the scale of the data that we're dealing with and how that's all interlinked, and then how that's presented back to the student. If this is what we're dealing with in terms of complexity inside an institution, you can then imagine what the student's trying to deal with. We'll all have the kind of classic example of a student raised a simple query, maybe with the help desk, doesn't get the right answer, then talks to 5 other different people, gets 7 different types of responses to that. And again, that's all a data type that we're dealing with. So what we absolutely need to do is try to reduce some of that complexity, not just from the student perspective, but also from our own perspective, because we're storing a lot of private and confidential information in the mix of that. So what do we do from a Tech 1 perspective? Eagle-eyed among you will see that I've taken the H off the HERM here to call it the ERM, because I think regardless of what particular part of the sector we're dealing with, it's very consistent in how we manage that student life cycle from applicant to graduate. And what we've done from a Technology 1 perspective is we've mapped our product, our student product and our other products against the HERM model. So you'll have to forgive me about the H, but I'm really just trying to show you that what we do here is we take a look at where the product fits in with that standard. And then the next stage of that is absolutely aligning ourselves with that common data standard that Charlsey talked about. Because if we, from a vendor perspective, can provide you the providers with the setup and the functionality within the solution, then you don't need to worry about how the data is moving around in the back end. So very much what we're about, and why I was so keen to be part of this, was that we can help to craft with yourselves and the rest of the sector how those services get delivered, because from a solution and a software perspective, we'll have already done the hard work. So this is just looking at the core student capability. And then we've also mapped that across our other product sets within that wider ecosystem across an institution. And then finally, I just want to leave you, I'm going to add this link into the chat. It's just an article we published last month about student systems. A lot of you will be very familiar with this, but it talks a little bit about how we can start to drive some of that consistency and how we can standardize things where possible, because we all across our institutions and our different providers have a different flavor of that. But I think this article starts to talk to how we can help with that consistency from a technology perspective, but also being very mindful of that business process. And I'm very happy to discuss this further with anyone who'd like to, but I'll drop this link into the chat just now. And then I'm going to hand back to Teresa.
Thank you. That was thanks Liv, and thank you Fan and Charlsey. Very interesting and at times a complex conversation. So we have got a few questions that we'll address from the Q&A box. So this one is from David. If the vision is to harmonise the tertiary education sectors, what is the plan to better, and I think you might have touched on this, but it would be good to, put a bit of a wrapping around it. What is the plan to better harmonise the common reporting of student data activity nationally between AVITMIS data standards and the higher education data standards, to have providers assist in the whole of sector student data and also reduce redundancy in data element management for dual sector providers? So this is the, that kind of question about, we've got the different kinds of data that we're collecting for the vet sector, and also the standards for AVITMIS and the standards for the higher education. So you might have touched a little bit on this, but perhaps you could just, maybe Charlsey or Olivia could speak to that one, or...
I can talk a little bit to it. So we have mapped the standard against both the VETMIS and TAXI, or TCSI, in Australia. And basically what we have are crosswalks. So it's very clear how you do this reporting and how it all comes to life. So the solution is quite technical, but because we've definitely thought about this within the ideation of the standard, what we're trying to do is ensure that you will be able to do the reporting that you need. Fan will be able to get what she needs, and everyone and Olivia will be able to build something that suits both purposes within the standard as it exists. Interestingly, in Canada, for instance, they actually don't have the rigorous reporting requirements that we do yet. Their provincial governments are very keen. So we're actually proposing, oh, hey, would you like to use the Australian standards? Because it gives you a lot of insights. And I do believe that HEMS is the UK one, and I think that a TAXI at least is around 70% similar to what is existent in the UK.
Thanks, Charlsey. Livia and Fan, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
I'm happy to jump in here just to add a little bit from one data perspective, also from like a high level overview of this. It's a great question, and because, as you know, having fit for purpose and high quality data, this is a key component in supporting our tertiary harmonization, right? In order to show, whether it's working, and to monitor how the system is going and how the tertiary harmonization is going, we need the information to be able to show whether it's working. So I definitely agree, just like Charlsey mentions, and the work, we need some work and to be done from a data collection perspective, also from data standards and the definition perspective, because we're talking about both vet and higher education sector. There are so many differences from different angles. But in order to make this a harmonized system, to be able for us to see the progress, we have to have the data collection and the standard definition and also reporting perspective to have a certain level of consistency so that we can compare. At the same time, another thing I want to add here is we can also look at leveraging existing data, just like the linked administrative data I mentioned, which if we can use, that will help reduce some of the reporting burden, or even some of the job profile data from LinkedIn, those data from a public available domain or resources, because it's more from to get the data that is useful for the students, for the sector, also for the governments, and also to reduce the reporting burden. We have a lot of reporting burden already, the sector. And what is the best way to use existing data and to change the things that we need to change, but at the minimal scale, and to make all the information that is useful and usable for not just tertiary harmonization, for all the key players in this whole picture.
Yeah, I really think that's so important. I think the other challenge we often have within the sector is how we're controlling some of that data that goes into the system, and how we're not necessarily thinking about it from a holistic perspective. And I think that's some of the challenge that I've experienced in how we're operating within institutions. And I think that has to feed into this, because what I've certainly experienced in the UK, some of you may be familiar with the HESA Data Futures Standard, and basically that landed on top of all the institutions, came in as very much a regulatory top-down approach to what was needed, but actually didn't take the time to plan through what was actually required from a student perspective and an institutional perspective. And so we didn't end up with the kind of ideal solution that we wanted. So I think it's really important that we think about the practical realities of how we can implement this, because I think we can all talk about standards and we can all aspire to do great things with it, but there's a little bit where we need to be brave as well in how we're going to manage that within the institutions, because to be able to drive this change, to get that better solution for our students, we also need to simplify how we operate. So that's a kind of a balance, I think, in terms of how we look at this going forward.
Thanks, Olivia and Fan for yes, that was quite an extended conversation on a very complex issue, but a lot happening, and I think that aligns with Ron's question as well, which is about the aligning the vet and higher education data sets, and as part of harmonisation, it's a key piece of work. So anything else to add there onto that question, Fan? So Ron's asked if the proposed tertiary education national data set will build on the vet national data asset. Any comment on that? I think we've pretty much, yes.
Yeah, very happy to add that question. Yes, great question again. We are doing a lot of work, of course, to support tertiary harmonization. And from a data perspective, like I just showed on the vet side of things, we've built some wonderful analytical work to show the vet systems or the impact or the benefit on our vet students. And very soon, keep your eye out there, we are going to publish a report around higher education students' outcomes from the employment perspective, also income and career transition perspective. So that's vet, that's also higher ed. At the same time, what we are doing in building this whole foundation of data is just to build vet and higher education together and linking with other key government administrative data assets. What this will tell us is really, really powerful. For example, we'll be able to see students' movement from vet to higher education, also from higher education to vet. What is the most popular qualification level, and also the qualification, also the level of qualification. And then we can track them through into their labor market outcomes, so that we can track it, and also we can tell a wonderful story. And what's the difference between, if someone who completes vet, completes higher education, or have completed both, so that we can really see if we have a system that is working, or if not, where are the gaps, where are the focus area, or for the policy and programs that should focus on more, and the outcomes are different or the same for different priority cohorts. Because we have real passion to improve not just the national overall figure for the priority cohorts, First Nations students from a culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, or from very remote areas, or from other, also students with disabilities. What's their outcome? Will tertiary harmonization help them? Yes, we're building that data set, and great work there.
Thanks, Fan. That's a great response, and hopefully that has helped some of you to understand what's going on in the background, and how some of this work in terms of streamlining the data will add to the harmonisation piece, but in a way that may not be obvious. If it works well, I guess it's not going to be something that's obvious to when we're looking at it from that perspective. It should be happening seamlessly in the background, and hopefully join it up and make it that a very seamless pathways for students, and also give us those really important insights, so that we can improve what we're doing and continue to improve that harmonisation piece. Yes, so for those of you who are asking about the presentations, we definitely will be sharing those with you later. I know there's some quite interesting slides in there that you'll want to explore in more detail. Now, Erin has asked, what is the Tech One vision for how this data is made available for TAFEs more readily in a self-service manner in their education system offering? So, Olivia, I know you've typed a response there, but this is about TAFEs being able to access this kind of, in a self-service manner. Is that something?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just typed that answer, but you know, we really believe in helping institutions to try and simplify how they're using the software so that we can then get the best outcome in terms of being able to access that data readily. So I was just saying we launched a thought leadership paper on this, and I'd be really keen to follow up with you, Erin, to kind of have that open discussion about how we could co-design that to really truly understand what you need, what the business needs from a solution, so that we can work in partnership. Because I do think sometimes we can you know, not necessarily truly understand what we're trying to deliver at that business front end. And we really need to take that on board to understand what solutions we can deliver that will actually enable you to meet that objective. And then I think the other part of this, from the business side, from my perspective, is trying to manage all the data that's going into your system, and the kind of policies and the procedures internally within the institution would really help to simplify some of that. Certainly work that I did in one of my institutions was to just take a look at what data we collect and what is the purpose, who needs access to that. And this is simple kind of access control, but we had a new framework in Europe around the GDPR, and that helped to kind of drive us to take a hard look at what we're collecting data for, what's the purpose, what's the use of that. And I see a lot of that coming through here with some of that ISO approach as well across the sector. So I'd be really keen, Erin, to have that open conversation with yourselves.
Thanks, Liv. And I guess a timeline on that's ongoing. Yes, so
very much so. But to be clear, we are going to align with, you know, Charlsey, and once we get that standard published, we will be coming out pretty quickly thereafter with what we see as that roadmap for how we can help the sector achieve that common standard.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, what we're looking at today has actually come together extremely quickly, compared to how, you know, the time frame that we might normally expect such a large body of work. It actually, and even the work that JSA is doing, it is going along at a cracking pace, isn't it? So hopefully the stars will align, and we'll be talking to you again, you know, soon in the not too distant future, and we'll be seeing how some of this is all playing out, and looking at how this harmonisation piece is being supported with these consistent data standards. So really a wonderful conversation today, and I wanted to thank all of you. So thank you, Fan, Olivia, Charlsey, for coming today to talk to us about a very complex but necessary and important piece of work that you're all working on in the background while we're all wanting to see it come to fruition and work well. And also thank you to Technology One for helping to support this TAFE Talks today. Our next one is happening and you'll see the link in the chat. It's on the 29th of October, Building the Future of Education with Humans and Gen AI with Professor Martin Bean. And so that will be on the 29th of October. It's available for you to register now. But I would like to say thank you to the audience as well for your great participation and questions. That was brilliant. And we will see you again on the 29th, hopefully. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.